Hello students! This is going to be the last video that I'll record for a few weeks here. You'll be in good hands with your substitutes. We're actually going to press the pause button briefly on some of our Mexico history unit, and that's to pave way for a project you will be doing. You're going to hear more information about that from your substitutes. The previous video already went over the basics of Nafta. We're going to start by talking about some of the pros and cons of Nafta and then shift into this really interesting chapter of this whole narrative. That is the rise of maquiladora factories. So we'll cut it off at that. You ready? Let's do the thing. So if you didn't check out the previous video, make sure you do before you watch this one, because that introduces you to Nafta. The one before that actually talks about the Mexican economic crisis that necessitated Nafta. So please check that out. But with that said, Nafta it's been replaced by something called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. But before Nafta went away, it was very controversial. And what's interesting about it was that it was controversial by a number of different political perspectives. Liberals and conservatives took issues with it, but to an extent they took issues with it for different reasons. Okay? So let's think about the pros. And if you guys already checked out that video on the avocados, shoes, and also toy cars, you probably already have a sense of some of the pros of Nafta. In general, with less taxes on trade, this makes goods cheaper. So the avocado example is a perfect one. In general, Americans consume more avocados when they are no longer taxed when imported from Mexico. Okay, we don't have the climate to sustain a year-long avocado season throughout the country like Mexico does. Okay, so that means that we can buy them as Americans more cheaply. And in general, that affects a large portion of the population. By no means are avocados the only example here. It's just the one that we looked at in the video. So think about other examples of products that are imported from other parts of North America that are cheaper because of a reduced cost of labor or no tariffs. Okay? The other thing is that it did create millions of new jobs. Many of those new jobs were in the transportation industry. Some of them were indeed in the manufacturing industry as well. So this expansion of free trade across North America, I say transportation in particular because with free trade, there's an expansion of the flow of goods and services across the US-Mexico border and the US-Canada border. So there needs to be transportation and also, of course, everything that goes along with it, from shipping facilities, etc. So there are a lot of new jobs that are created as a result of Nafta. Also, it increased foreign investment, yet again. In general, during the import substitution industrialization period in Mexico, there was less foreign investment in the Mexican economy because if Mexico was limiting its reliance on imports, there was less of an incentive for foreign countries and other private industries, such as privately owned banks, to put money into the Mexican economy, and also the Canadian economy for that matter. So the U.S. invested billions of dollars in the Mexican and Canadian economy. So that was good for both of those economies. And of course, the American investors who got returns on the investment, that was good for them as well. We already touched upon this. Goods are much cheaper. So trade increases and goods are much less expensive to purchase because of the cheap cost of production. Now let's focus on the cons. Okay, some of this is it's a wordy slide. Don't necessarily look at the length of one column over the other and place your judgment. Leave your own analysis of Nafta to your best judgment here. Okay, so one thing is that many manufacturing jobs, but as you can see, not as many as the new jobs created, but about 500,000 manufacturing jobs were eliminated in the United States because the Mexican counterpart in the Labor Department was cheaper. So many manufacturing jobs moved to Mexico, and that caused some parts of the country to experience a major shortage of those jobs. But that was not felt as broadly throughout the country. There were certain parts of the country that felt this pinch more acutely. More specifically, this happened quite a bit in the American South and also the Midwest. So countries that have a lot of used to rather have lots of manufacturing plants since NAFTA was signed in 1994 have seen a major change in their economy. I realize that you guys don't remember what things were like before 1994, but there were far more economic opportunities in manufacturing in those parts of the country than there are today. Okay, so many blame the loss of their jobs on NAFTA. Okay, but again, that's more acute in certain parts of the country. In a place like Southern California, we may not feel that as acutely. Okay, this also was controversial because many Americans argued that their wages were low because wages in Mexico were lower. And so if a company argued to its employees that it could easily pick up shop, move to Mexico where it could hire employees for cheaper wages, this was a way that American laborers argued that they were being exploited. Forgive me, that wasn't very grammatically sound, but many Americans were upset with their employers because they argued that their wages should be higher and that their employers should not hold their jobs hostage by threatening to establish a factory in Mexico and close down the factory in the US. Okay? Um, this is really bad for Mexican agriculture because the United States actually continued to subsidize many of its agricultural products, but Mexico ended its farm subsidies. So that meant that U.S. agriculture eclipsed Mexican agriculture, and most of the food that Mexicans relied on was imported from the United States. Yes, it was imported tariff-free, but that meant that Mexican farmers could not compete with the cheap prices of American goods, causing lots of farms to fail even further than they already were. This also meant that many Mexican farmers found themselves out of the job, and they either migrated to border cities to work in maquiladoras, we briefly touched upon those previously, or they also might have decided to move further and cross into the United States in search of work. Now, by no means did all of them cross illegally, but many of them did, and the reason why they did that, again, was because they were desperate to find economic opportunities. If they stopped in a border city like Nogales and did not find work, the chances were that they might continue to seek other economic employment opportunities on the U.S. side of the border, hence increasing illegal immigration. Okay? This is probably long. Let's talk about maquiladoras. So I lied. We got one more after this. I know you guys are going to miss me, even though I talk too much. All right, stay tuned. Thanks.